The day my wife changed the locks started like every other ordinary Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. Just another quiet morning in our small suburban house outside Denver, the same house I had lived in for nearly 8 years. I remember standing in the kitchen pouring coffee while the sunlight slipped through the blinds in thin golden stripes across the counter. My wife, Melissa, was sitting at the table scrolling on her phone. She barely looked up when I said good morning. That wasn't unusual anymore. Things had been tense between us for months. Not explosive fights, not screaming matches, just a cold silence that seemed to grow thicker every week. Still, that morning felt normal enough. "Working late again?" she asked, without lifting her eyes from the screen. "Probably," I said. "We're closing a contract this week." That was it. 8 years of marriage, and our conversations had shrunk to 3-letter responses. I grabbed my keys and paused near the door. "You okay?" I asked her. She finally looked up at me. For a split second, there was something strange in her expression. Something sharp, almost calculating. But then it disappeared. "I'm fine," she said flatly. I nodded and left. If someone had told me that would be the last time I walked out of my own house as its owner, I would have laughed in their face. The day at work was chaos. Phones ringing, clients arguing, deadlines piling up, the kind of day where you blink and suddenly it's dark outside. By the time I drove home, it was nearly 8 p.m. The neighborhood was quiet, streetlights glowing, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the same peaceful routine I'd seen 1,000 times. But when I pulled into my driveway, something immediately felt wrong. At first, I couldn't even explain why. Then I noticed it. The front porch light was off. Melissa always left it on when I worked late. Always. I sat in the car for a second, staring at the house. The windows were dark. Maybe she had gone out. I grabbed my bag, walked up the steps, and slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I frowned and tried again. Nothing. The key wouldn't move. "That's weird," I muttered. Maybe the lock was jammed. I pulled the key out, looked at it, then tried once more. Still nothing. And then the realization slowly crept into my chest like ice water. This wasn't my lock. Someone had changed it. I stepped back from the door, confused. Maybe maintenance had done something? Maybe Melissa had called someone? But she would have told me, right? I knocked. "Melissa?" No answer. I knocked again, louder. "Melissa, it's me." The porch light suddenly flicked on. My stomach tightened. A second later, the door opened just a few inches, and there she was, Melissa, standing inside the doorway like a stranger. But the first thing I noticed wasn't her expression. It was the man standing behind her. Tall, maybe mid-30s, dark jacket, arms crossed like he belonged there. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. "Melissa?" I said slowly. "Why doesn't my key work?" She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Cold, detached, almost amused. Finally, she said something that made the ground disappear under my feet. I changed the locks. I blinked. "What?" "You heard me." "Why would you change the—" Then she opened the door wider and leaned against the frame. "This house isn't yours anymore, Daniel." For a moment, I genuinely thought she was joking. I even laughed a little. "Okay, what?" But she didn't laugh. Her voice stayed perfectly calm. "You should leave." I stared at her. "Melissa, what are you doing?" She crossed her arms. "You moved out." My heart skipped. "No, I didn't." "You did," she replied coolly. "You've been gone for weeks." "What? I literally left this morning." The man behind her stepped forward slightly. "Buddy, you need to go." I looked at him. "Who the hell are you?" Melissa answered before he could. "My boyfriend." The word hit me like a punch. My ears rang. I laughed again, but this time it sounded hollow even to me. "Melissa, stop. This isn't funny." She tilted her head. "I'm not joking." I took a step toward the door. "Move." The man stepped in front of her. "Take another step and I call the cops." I stared at him. Then I looked back at my wife. "Melissa, what are you doing?" Her expression didn't change. "I'm taking my house back." "Our house," I corrected automatically. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that makes your blood run cold. "No," she said quietly. "It was never yours." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" She shrugged. "You'll find out." Then she slowly pushed the door closed, right in my face. I stood there on the porch, staring at the wood like my brain had stopped working. Inside the house, I heard the lock click. A new lock, not mine. Not anymore. I knocked again, harder. "Melissa!" Nothing. The windows stayed dark. The street stayed silent. And I realized something terrifying. I had no idea what had just happened, or how my entire life had been taken away in the 10 hours I spent at work. I slept in my car that night, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because my brain refused to accept reality. I kept staring at the house, waiting for the door to open, waiting for Melissa to come out and say it was all some horrible joke. But the door never opened. Around midnight, I saw the living room light turn on, and through the curtains I saw two shadows moving inside, Melissa and him, laughing, in my house, in my living room, using my furniture. Something inside my chest slowly turned from confusion into something darker, because none of this made sense, not legally, not financially, not logically. My name was on the mortgage. I paid the bills. I bought the damn house. So how could she possibly say it wasn't mine anymore? That question kept spinning in my head all night, but I didn't get the answer until a week later, when a lawyer looked me straight in the eye and said something that made everything 10 times worse. "Mr. Carter, according to the documents, you haven't owned that house for 6 months."
The lawyer's words sat in the air between us like a bomb that had just gone off. "Mr. Carter, according to the documents, you haven't owned that house for 6 months." I stared at him, waiting for him to correct himself. He didn't. Instead, he calmly turned his monitor slightly toward me. Rows of legal files filled the screen. Property transfers, signatures, dates. All official, all stamped, all real. "This has to be a mistake," I said slowly. The lawyer, a gray-haired man named Richard Holloway, folded his hands on the desk. "I understand why you'd think that, but legally speaking, the property was transferred." "Transferred to who?" He clicked something. A new document appeared. Owner, Melissa Carter. Transfer date, 6 months earlier. My throat went dry. "That's impossible." "Is it?" "Yes," I snapped, "because I never signed anything like that." He leaned back slightly. "You did." He zoomed in on the document, and there it was, my signature. Perfect. Exactly like the one I'd used on hundreds of papers over the years. Except I had never seen this document in my life. I felt the room tilt slightly. That's fake." "Forgery is a serious accusation," he replied calmly. "I'm not accusing, I'm telling you." He studied my face for a moment. "You truly don't remember signing a property transfer agreement?" "No. Not even during your refinancing process last year?" My stomach dropped. "Refinancing?" "Yes. According to these files, the house was refinanced 8 months ago." I blinked. "That never happened." He slowly turned the screen again. Another document. Loan agreement. Mortgage adjustment. My name, my signature. Melissa's name, her signature. My chest tightened, because now something felt very, very wrong. "Who filed these?" I asked quietly. He checked the records. "A Hayes and Morrow law firm." "I've never heard of them." "They handled the property transfer on behalf of your wife." A cold pressure settled in my head.
So let me understand this, I said slowly. You're telling me my wife somehow transferred ownership of my house to herself using paperwork I've never seen, with signatures I never signed, and nobody questioned it? The lawyer's expression stayed neutral. Legally speaking, the documents appear valid. But they aren't. Then you'll need to prove that. I leaned forward. You're missing the part where my wife locked me out of the house and moved another guy in. For the first time, his eyebrows lifted slightly. She did what? She changed the locks while I was at work and told me the house isn't mine anymore. He was quiet for a moment. Did she file a separation? I don't know. Divorce papers? No. Police report? No. Then legally you're still married. I let out a dry laugh. That's comforting. He leaned forward. If what you're saying is true, then this situation is extremely unusual. Unusual? I said. That's one word for it. He closed the file and looked at me directly. Mr. Carter, I need to ask you something important. What? Do you trust your wife? I didn't answer, because suddenly the last year of my marriage began replaying in my mind like a slow-motion nightmare. Melissa insisting on handling most of the paperwork, Melissa saying refinancing would save us money, Melissa asking me to sign a few documents late at night when I was exhausted from work. Just sign here, she'd said casually. It's boring bank stuff. At the time, I barely looked. We were married. Why would I? My stomach twisted. Oh my God. The lawyer watched my face carefully. You signed something, didn't you? I don't know. How many documents? Maybe 5 or 6? Did you read them? No. His silence said everything. My chest felt tight. Are you telling me she tricked me into signing my house away? He shook his head slowly. I'm not saying the possibility exists. My pulse started pounding. But even if she did, I said quickly, she can't just kick me out. I still live there. That depends. On what? On what those documents say. He pulled another file, more pages, more legal language. Then he stopped. His expression changed. Not shock, but something close. What? I asked. He looked up. Mr. Carter, did you ever agree to a post-nuptial agreement? No. He turned the screen again. A thick document appeared. Post-nuptial property agreement. Signed, dated, my signature at the bottom. My vision blurred. What is that? It appears you and your wife legally separated your financial assets. I never agreed to that. You signed it. I didn't know what it was. He nodded slowly. That may be true. I leaned back in the chair, feeling like the floor had disappeared under me. So what happens now? That depends on something very important. What? Intent. What does that mean? If your wife deliberately misled you into signing legal documents without explaining them, that could be fraud. A small spark of hope appeared. So we can reverse it? He hesitated. Possibly. Possibly? But there's another issue. My stomach sank again. What issue? He capped the screen. According to this agreement, you voluntarily gave up ownership of the property. That's insane. Yes, but it gets worse. I felt dread crawl up my spine. How could it possibly get worse? He opened one last file. This document states that in the event of separation, the house belongs exclusively to your wife. My head started spinning. And you agreed to vacate the property. I stared at him. I never agreed to that. He gave a small shrug. But legally, you did. The room fell silent.
Then I asked the question that had been building inside me since that night on the porch. What about the guy living there? The boyfriend? Yeah. Legally, if she owns the house, she can invite whoever she wants. I laughed bitterly. So I got kicked out of my own house by my wife and her boyfriend using documents I didn't even know I signed? That appears to be the situation. I rubbed my face slowly. This can't be real. The lawyer leaned forward again. Mr. Carter, there is one thing that bothers me. What? He turned the screen toward me again and pointed at the date. 6 months ago. He said quietly, most people who plan something like this don't act suddenly. They prepare. I frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying if your wife started this process 6 months ago, he paused, then she has been planning this for a very long time. A chill ran down my spine, because that meant something terrifying. Melissa didn't just wake up one day and decide to betray me. She had been preparing, carefully, quietly, right under my nose. But the worst part? I still had no idea why. And I didn't realize yet that the real answer was sitting inside my own house, sleeping in my bed, living my life. And I was about to discover something about Melissa that would make losing the house look like the smallest problem in the world. I walked out of the lawyer's office feeling like the world had quietly shifted a few inches to the side. Nothing looked different. Cars moved down the street, people talked on their phones, someone across the road laughed about something. But inside my head, everything felt wrong. 6 months. Melissa had been planning something for 6 months. The thought crawled through my mind like a slow poison. I got into my car and sat there staring at the steering wheel. The lawyer's voice kept echoing. You voluntarily gave up ownership of the property. No, I didn't, I whispered. But the truth was ugly. I might not have known what I was signing, but I had signed it. And Melissa knew that. She knew I trusted her. She knew I wouldn't read every line. And somehow she had used that trust like a weapon. My phone buzzed suddenly. A text message. From Melissa. Just 2 words. Stop digging. My chest tightened. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. You stole my house. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, another message came through. No, I took back what belongs to me. I stared at the screen. We bought that house together. Her reply came almost instantly. You think you know everything, Daniel. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What does that mean? This time, the typing bubble stayed there longer. Then her message came. You should just move on. I laughed under my breath. Move on? 8 years of marriage? My home? My entire life? And she thought I was just going to walk away? I didn't reply. Instead, I started the car and drove. Not to a hotel, not to a friend's place. I drove back to the house, the same house I had been locked out of a week earlier. Night had fallen by the time I pulled into the neighborhood. Everything looked the same as it always had. The quiet sidewalks, the maple tree in our front yard, the porch where Melissa and I used to sit during summer evenings, drinking cheap wine and talking about the future. I parked down the street this time, far enough that the headlights wouldn't catch the windows. Then I walked slowly toward the house. The living room lights were on. Through the curtains, I could see movement. 2 silhouettes again, Melissa and him. My jaw tightened. I didn't know the guy's name, didn't know where he came from, but somehow he had stepped into my life like he had always belonged there. I stood across the street watching the house, and something strange happened. The front door opened. The boyfriend stepped outside. He lit a cigarette and leaned against the railing. For the first time, I got a good look at his face.
Mid-30s maybe, short beard, confident posture, like the kind of guy who had never been told no in his life. He took a drag and looked down the street. For a second, I thought he saw me, but he just exhaled smoke and looked away. A minute later, Melissa stepped outside too. She wrapped her arms around herself against the cool air. Then she leaned against him, like they had been doing it for years. Something burned in my chest. Not jealousy, not exactly. Something colder, because the way they stood together felt practiced, familiar, like this wasn't new. The boyfriend said something I couldn't hear. Melissa laughed. The sound carried faintly across the quiet street. And suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind. 6 months ago, Melissa laughing at her phone late at night. When I asked who she was texting, she smiled and said, "Just a friend." My stomach turned. They went back inside after a few minutes, but something else caught my attention. A car pulled into the driveway. A black sedan. I frowned. We didn't know anyone with that car. A man stepped out, older, suit, carrying a briefcase. He walked straight up to the house and knocked. Melissa opened the door immediately, like she had been expecting him. They shook hands. The boyfriend stood beside her. All 3 of them disappeared inside. I felt a strange knot forming in my chest. Who the hell was that? I moved a little closer to the house, staying in the shadows of the trees. The living room window was slightly open, just enough for voices to slip out. "Documents are finalized," the older man was saying. Melissa sounded calm. "Good. And the transfer is complete." The boyfriend spoke next. "So it's done?" "Yes," the man replied. "Everything is legally airtight." My pulse started pounding. Melissa asked the question that made my blood run cold. "And Daniel?" The man chuckled lightly. "He doesn't stand a chance." My fists clenched. The boyfriend laughed too. "Told you he'd never see it coming." Melissa didn't laugh. Her voice was quieter. "He trusted me." The older man shrugged. "Trust is useful." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Melissa said something that made my heart skip. "Once the final sale goes through, we're leaving." "Sale?" The older man replied. "The buyers are already interested." Buyers? My chest tightened. They weren't just stealing my house, they were planning to sell it. The boyfriend sounded excited. "How much?" The man named a number. Even from outside, I almost choked. It was nearly double what we had paid. The neighborhood had exploded in value over the past year. Melissa said softly, "That should be enough." "More than enough," the man replied. "For what?" the boyfriend asked. Melissa answered quietly, "For our new life." Silence hung in the room, and then the boyfriend asked something that made my skin crawl. "And what about Daniel when he finds out?" Melissa didn't hesitate. "He won't." The older man chuckled again. "And if he does, it'll be too late." My heart hammered in my ears, because suddenly everything made sense. The documents, the locks, the boyfriend, the legal trap, they weren't just kicking me out, they were erasing me, selling the house, taking the money, and disappearing. But as I stood there in the darkness, listening to my wife plan a new life without me, another thought slowly formed in my mind, something the lawyer had said earlier. If your wife deliberately misled you into signing those documents, that could be fraud. At the time, it had sounded like a small chance, a weak possibility. But now I had heard them, planning it, laughing about it, confident I was too stupid to fight back. A slow, dangerous calm spread through me, because Melissa had made one mistake. She thought I was still the same trusting husband she had manipulated for 8 years. She had no idea that I had just heard every word, and I was about to make a decision that would change all of their lives forever. But I didn't realize yet that Melissa was hiding one final secret. A secret buried inside that house. A secret so shocking that it would explain why she had been willing to destroy everything just to get rid of me. And I was going to discover it the very next night, right inside the place that used to be my home.
I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I sat in my car parked 2 blocks away from the house that used to be mine, staring at the dark sky while everything I had heard replayed in my head over and over again. They were going to sell the house, take the money, disappear, and leave me with nothing. 8 years of marriage erased like it never existed. But the thing that kept bothering me wasn't just the betrayal. It was Melissa's voice when she said something earlier. Once the final sale goes through, we're leaving. Leaving where? And why so fast? People who sell houses normally don't run away overnight. Something about this felt rushed, desperate, like they were trying to get away before something caught up to them. Around 2 a.m., I finally made a decision. If Melissa had spent 6 months secretly planning this, then there had to be something inside that house explaining why. Something she didn't want me to find. And I knew that house better than anyone. I had remodeled half of it myself. The windows, the locks, the back entrance, especially the old basement door on the side of the house, a door Melissa never used, but I had kept the spare key. Not for the front door, for the basement. I waited until the street went completely silent. Then I walked through the shadows toward the backyard. Every step felt heavier than the last. The house looked peaceful, like nothing inside it had changed, but I knew better now. I reached the side of the house and pulled the small, rusted key from my pocket. My heart pounded while I slid it into the basement lock. For a second, I thought Melissa might have changed this one too, but the key turned softly. The door creaked open just enough for me to slip inside. The basement smelled the same as always. Old wood, concrete, dust. The familiar scent almost made my chest tighten. This used to be my safe place, my workshop, where I fixed things, built shelves, worked on projects. Now I felt like a stranger breaking into someone else's home. I slowly climbed the basement stairs. The house above me was quiet. Too quiet. Melissa and her boyfriend were probably asleep. I stepped into the kitchen. Everything looked the same. Our table, our refrigerator, the coffee machine I had bought her last Christmas. But something else was different. Boxes. Several cardboard boxes stacked near the wall. Packed. Ready to move. They really were planning to leave. Soon. My chest burned with anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. I moved through the living room quietly, and that's when I saw something strange. A door near the hallway was open. That room used to be my office, but now the entire floor was covered with papers, documents, folders, files. My stomach tightened. I walked inside and picked up the nearest folder. Bank statements, loan agreements, transfer documents, dozens of them, not just about the house, about other things too. New bank accounts, large money transfers, names I didn't recognize. Then I opened one final folder, and everything inside me went cold, because at the top of the first page were 3 words: life insurance policy. My name was listed, Daniel Carter. Policy value $2 million. My hands started shaking. I flipped the page. Primary beneficiary, Melissa Carter. A chill ran down my spine. Then I saw something even worse. The date. The policy had been opened 7 months ago, just 1 month before the house transfer. My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and suddenly the entire plan became terrifyingly clear. The house, the legal documents, the boyfriend, the money transfers. Melissa hadn't just been planning to take my house. She had been building something much bigger, something darker.
because if I disappeared, if something happened to me, she wouldn't just get the house, she would get $2 million. Footsteps creaked upstairs. My head snapped toward the ceiling. Someone was awake. Then I heard Melissa's voice, soft, sleepy. "Did you hear something?" My pulse exploded. Her boyfriend answered from the hallway. "Probably nothing." The floor creaked again. They were moving towards the stairs, towards me. I quickly shoved the insurance papers back into the folder and stepped into the shadows of the office. The hallway light flicked on. Their footsteps came closer. Melissa walked into the room first, and when she saw me standing there, she froze. Her face turned pale. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then her boyfriend stepped in behind her, and the moment he saw me, his expression changed instantly, from surprise to anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snapped. I didn't answer. I just held up the insurance folder. Melissa's eyes dropped to it, and I watched the exact moment she realized what I had found. Her lips parted slightly. "Daniel," I laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. "The house wasn't enough, huh?" Neither of them spoke. I took a slow step forward. "You were going to sell the house, disappear, and when I accidentally died somewhere along the way," I tapped the folder, "you'd get $2 million. The boyfriend's jaw tightened. "That's a crazy accusation." "Is it?" Melissa finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You weren't supposed to see that." The words hung in the air like poison. Not, "That's not true," not, "You're wrong," just, "You weren't supposed to see that." Something inside my chest went completely still. The boyfriend stepped closer, like he was preparing to push me out of the house again, but this time I didn't move. Instead, I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Their voices filled the room, clear as day, the recording from outside the window. "Once the final sale goes through, we're leaving. He doesn't stand a chance. He'll never find out." The color drained from Melissa's face. The boyfriend stopped moving. The recording ended. Silence filled the room. Then I looked straight at them. "You planned everything," I said quietly. Melissa's eyes were wide. "Daniel, listen." "No," I interrupted. "You listen." I held up the phone. "I've already sent copies of this recording and every document in this room to my lawyer." Neither of them breathed. "And tomorrow morning," I continued calmly, "the police will be listening to it too." The boyfriend took a step back. Melissa looked like she might collapse. For the first time since this nightmare started, they were the ones who looked scared. I turned and walked toward the door. Melissa's voice followed me down the hallway. "Daniel, wait!" I paused at the front door, but didn't turn around. Her voice shook now. "We can fix this." I finally looked back at Melissa, the woman I had trusted for 8 years, the woman who had almost destroyed my life. "There's nothing left to fix," I said quietly. Then I opened the door and walked out of the house for the last time, not as the man who lost everything, but as the man who had just exposed the truth. Behind me, I heard Melissa start to cry, but I didn't stop walking, because some doors, once they close, should never be opened again. And if this story kept you hooked until the very end, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves intense stories like this. You never know, the next story might be even more shocking.